His father and mother were artists, and he learned that was not a good way to make a living. Fred wanted to be a salesman because salesmen make good money and can support their families. And with a wife and a new child, he decided the fastest and easiest way to learn who was the best employer in his community was to get a short-term job selling advertising for an Emeryville newspaper. 6 weeks after he started selling over $20,000 worth of advertising, more than his publisher had ever seen, the publisher could not resist the temptation and took off with the money. Okay, so that leaves Fred and his co-workers and the paper's advertisers empty-handed. So from his kitchen table, with a few co-workers willing to take a risk in exchange for a piece of the company, they started the Bay City Journal in 1981. Well, from that point on, Fred continued working in the industry of writing and advertising and so forth. And so working for small, typically underfunded projects meant that Fred learned every aspect of the publishing business. He's done advertising sales, publishing, circulation, newsstand distribution, copy editing, and graphic production. He's been a reporter, a columnist, editor, art director, creative director, and so forth. He's won awards for both his art direction and for editing. He's published books, newspapers, magazines, local, national, and international. Now he's comfortably retired and happy writing poetry and playing with his grandkids. He got snookered into doing the 2020 CWC Literary Review by allowing himself to be elected as the Berkeley branch's representative to the Central Board, where he foolishly mentioned that he knew a little bit about publishing. I guess so. Be careful what you say, because you might just find yourself in charge. I like that. And so we were talking about this earlier. This is the latest copy of the Literary Review. He's totally changed the look of it. He's made it into a book rather than a magazine that's hard to put on your shelf. And so this is, it looks fantastic. The writing in it is excellent. And we thank you, Fred, for designing this and working. So even though you say it only took you a couple hours, but it's a great job. We all appreciate it. We look forward to next year's as well. And so let's give a big hand to our presenter for today, Fred Dodsworth.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. One of the things that when Bob originally asked me to do this, I kind of wanted to talk about the role that community plays in creating a project like this and the importance of building a writer's community. Because with a writer's community, you not only improve your own writing, you build a community that will support you and that can allow things like this anthology. I'm really excited to hear that you folks have been putting out anthologies for 10 years. I've been a member of the CWC for 2 years now, I think, and I've been trying to get my local chapter to do it. And even though you would think they would be all in favor of this, it just has not happened. As I was putting together this project, I talked to the branches all across the state, and I was really impressed to see how many branches do put out a local anthology. A local anthology is a wonderful way to give people a solid, real product that they can show in the world and that they can feel good about. Bob Isbell and I were talking about this, and we changed the production schedule to allow this book to come out before Christmas.
Right.
With the idea that maybe you might want to buy an extra copy for somebody that you care about and show them what you're doing with your life. And I want to take this a step further. This pandemic is no fun. And I have friends who have gotten the disease and it's not good. As I was telling Mike and Dwight earlier, I have two daughter-in-laws who are doctors. They have impressed upon me the seriousness of this, so we've taken it very, very close to heart. That said, with Zoom, I have participated in more readings than I would ever normally participate in. And I've seen wonderfully a great variety of people who historically were not really willing to do the travel that was necessary, who could not, for a variety of reasons get there, who are now participating in these readings. And so I think that now that you've got this wonderful survival thing out, which I would love to get a copy of and I will happily pay for, I'm serious. This is beautiful work. And this is the kind of work you're not going to get from the Poetry Foundation or from LitHub or from any of the major national and international literary organizations. But as you've seen in this current book, there's a lot of good work there.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to celebrate and promote each other. I don't know if you know this, but in the last 20 years, the number of publishers, independent publishers, has fallen as much as the number of independent newspapers, independent radio stations, and independent publishers, newspapers, and just radio stations and television stations. Right now, all of this is being controlled by a handful of very, very wealthy multinational corporations. And you have the opportunity to seize that control right in your own community and create your own literary publication. And I'm thrilled to see you do it. And I'm hoping that I can use your example to encourage my own branch to do the same. So one of the important things about building a literary community is finding people that you trust. And it's really, really easy to get sabotaged. I have been part of so many workshops where people say things like, well, that's cliched, or I don't believe that, or that's not real. I can't, it doesn't grip me. And those are not productive things to say in a literary group. Those are things that stop people and give them writer's block. I posted up here, and I'm going to post it again just because not all of you have gotten into this again. The Liz Lerman Method. Liz Lerman was a choreographer, and Liz discovered that there were too many people in the very, very competitive field of dance who would trash each other. And so she set up a whole new series of ways to criticize positively. And the first part of it is that it's a 3-part process where the first thing you say is what you like about what you've read. And it doesn't matter whether it's dance or photography or writing or prose or poetry. The first thing that you need to do in a community to build the kind of support that makes you trust each other, that gives you the best sort of way forward and that helps you avoid things like writer's block, is to speak about what you like about each other. We're a very critical society, and we don't need more criticism. What we need is more support. And the second thing you do as you go around your group is you talk about what you don't understand. And as far as I'm concerned, the other steps are really not important. But by telling each other in a positive way what confused you in a story, you can actually help them become better writers. Not what you didn't like, not what you didn't believe, but what wasn't clear to you. And so I think that's really, really critical. The other thing is, as we were talking with Rusty earlier, and Jenny, I guess also as well, it's important to read your work aloud. And Jenny was saying she teaches self-editing and she makes her students read to the mirror, read to their room, to an empty room. And it's really powerful because your ears hear a different thing than your mind says. And your ears don't fill in those things that you left out, the articles that John concepts together, the small details. And so it's really, really important in a writing group that you read your work aloud, more so that you read it aloud after you read it to yourself and your significant other, you read it aloud in a group. And I highly recommend that these Zoom groups are a wonderful way to share. And those of us who are elderly and don't get out so easy can get on Zoom. We don't have to travel an hour to an event and an hour back, and we can share this experience with people all over the world. And so that's one of the critical things that makes great writers, is actually hearing what you've got and having a support group that tells you how to be a better writer. Once you get the product, then you've got the opportunity to move forward into the next step. The next step, if you're part of a group, is an anthology, but also the next step can be a chapbook of your own, or can be submitting to many of the national groups that publish independent writings, whether it's short stories, excerpts from novels, or poems. I've been published in lots and lots of journals because I submit. And the reason I'm able to submit is because I went through that process of getting feedback, so that I knew that what I was submitting was excellent. One of the things I've done in my life is sales, and I've been a sales manager as well. And there's an old rule in business, and the rule is 80% of your troubles come from 20% of your clients. 80% of your profits come from 20% of your clients. And if you want to be published, you have to abide by that rule. You're going to send out 100 submissions, and 80 of them are going to ignore you. Those 20 that don't ignore you will publish you. It's not about how fabulous a writer you are. It's a numbers game. I was responsible for setting up a reading group here in the Bay Area that ran for 5 years, called Generations Reading. And we took on as our role the uniting of different generations, because as you all can see right here by looking at the screen, there are a lot of folks here with white hair. We have the time and the inclination to write, but there are a lot of young people who also write. And by doing a multi-generational writing group, we brought those two together, and we would get so many submissions. Every month we did a reading, we'd have about 5 pairs, which is 10 readers. Excuse me. And for those 10 readers, we would go through over 100 submissions every month. And we frequently rejected work that was excellent. And the reason we rejected it was because it didn't actually fit in a consecutive reading, in a kind of a way in which magically writing draws a line between all the writers and creates a narrative arc that makes a wonderful evening of readings. And so this was not about people not being good writers. This was about people not particularly fitting into what the mind of the editor had at the time. And the same is true of all your submissions. When you submit to work out there in the world, if it gets rejected, if you don't get feedback, it's not because your writing isn't good. It's because perhaps it just didn't fit. Perhaps there was a theme that month that the editor wasn't even aware of until the material started coming in. As an editor, and I've been an editor off and on for 30 years, I have put together many magazines and newspapers, and it's as true there as it is in these literary magazines. Every morning we'd go through our meeting on what was going to run in the newspaper that next day. And it was kind of amazing how somebody would come up with an idea and somebody else would come up with an idea, and somebody would say, well, I could do something a little different. And at 2 o'clock, we all turned in our stories that were the next day's newspaper. The editor-in-chief didn't know what the next day's newspaper was until they got all that material. So please, if you're not getting the feedback you want from the world, it's not because you're not the right writer, and it's not because your work is not the right stuff. It's coincidence, it's randomness, it's serendipity, and you have to submit again and again and again. I wrote a piece once about terminating a pregnancy, and that's a very, very hard piece. And I never, ever expected it to get published. And I submitted it a number of times. And finally, one of the local colleges asked for some stuff. And I thought, well, I don't really care. I'm just going to send this to them. And they published it. And I talked to the editor afterwards about it, and she told me it was one of her favorite pieces. This was a piece I never, ever, ever expected to get published. And that's kind of a lesson for you all. There's nothing you've got out there that someone somewhere won't find to be just the right brick, that keystone that will hold together their narrative, which is an anthology or a larger book or newspaper. So now I want to get to what the next step is, probably what you guys actually wanted me to talk about, which is putting together a book. So before I do that, I'm going to do my favorite quote. And I told Dwight and Mike this earlier, and I'm going to tell you all now. Writing is actually easy. Ernest Hemingway told me exactly how to write. He said, what you do is you open a vein and you bleed all over the typewriter. And that's true. If you want to write powerful works, you've got to actually produce powerful feelings inside you. There's another adage that says, the readers won't laugh or cry if the author is not laughing or crying when they're writing. And so that's a kind of a request to you to make yourself naked, to write what is powerful and real and important to you. And if it's powerful and real and important to you, it doesn't matter whether it ever gets published, because you've written something that is really only your story that no one else can actually tell. Now, I use in my work professional software, and my wife, who does graphics as well, doesn't use professional software. So you're welcome to use whatever you've got. Publisher is good, I hear. Word is good, I hear. I use 3 programs when I do all of my work. I use InDesign, which is a professional program that when I bought it 5 years ago, cost $1,000. It's not cheap. It comes with Photoshop. That's the other program I use. And then the third program I use is Word. And if you're submitting out there in the world, people want you to submit in Word because everybody has it. They want you to submit in 12-point type. They want you to submit in New York, New Times Roman, excuse me. New Times Roman, 12-point type. They want 1-inch margins all the way around, and they want it double spaced. And the reason they want it this way, and this is the reason I requested all of the editorial for the anthology to be presented this way, is you fit about 250 words on a page if you do it that way. So I can pick up a 10-page piece and know immediately it's 2,500 words. Now, maybe it's 2,200 words, maybe it's 2,700 words, but that's close enough. And that allows me to know how many pages it will consume in a periodical. And it doesn't matter whether it's a newspaper, where I was, as a front page columnist, required to turn in 600 words a day, which was a 300-word column plus a 300-word jump, which is what the newspaper wanted, or whether it is this particular publication that we just did, which is a 6x9, 6 inches wide, 9 inches tall, perfect bound book style publication. So when all the materials were sent to me that had been prejudged, I could look at the size of the body of work that was sent to me. I could estimate how many pages it was going to be. And that's really, really critical if you're trying to fit a budget. And the budget can be a cash budget, how much money we're going to spend on this book. And the budget can be a page budget, which is what we also call what those pages are. Anybody that's worked in the news business or in the magazine business knows that, you know, you put together a word budget, and that tells you how big your periodical is going to be. So Word, Times New Roman, 12-point, double space, 1-inch margins. I take, and this is something that's really kind of fun about this particular book. When I got all the editorial, there was no plan for any graphics in the book. And that's okay with me. I was totally fine with that, because all I had to do was send out to the reps and their local presidents of the branches a request that they propagated out to their members with my email address for interesting pieces of art. And I told them, and if you saw this, if you were one of the people that was chosen to illustrate this book, I told them I wasn't looking for a theme. I was looking for an image that moved you, much like writing. We're not looking for a theme. We're looking for work that moves you, work that you feel proud of. And the amazing thing was I got buried in art, in photographs, in illustrations and drawings and sculptures from the California Writers Club members, people who probably don't belong to the California Artists Club or the California Photographers Club, people who were shooting with their cameras that are also phones. And as you can see, the work came out fantastic. You know, I could have put in 108 pages of images easily that were good enough to run with this. And so when you're putting together a periodical, a local anthology or your own chapbook, don't think of yourself as not being an artist. You are an artist. That snapshot of your grandson might be perfect, might be a fantastic image for a particular story that you've written as well. I'm a poet, and I took a photograph of my grandson and I turned it into a woodblock print, and I made a broadside that I feel extremely proud of. And I've given away to a lot of people. That is of this image of my grandson in a poem that I wrote that's not about him per se, that it's about every child. And so everything that you do is potentially art. And I really kind of learned this from the business. In the 80s, there was a 4AD, which is a record company out of England, that took the most random photographs and used them for album covers and used them for liner notes. And I realized this can be used in your publications as well. Your chapbooks, your anthologies, your club mags, you know, all of these things. And pictures tell stories. They invite readers into the page. So Photoshop, InDesign, Word, and I use a Macintosh. The other thing I want to talk about is how to make a publication look professional. And it's really kind of simple. It's keep it simple. For example, in the CWC book, I used all my typefaces were the same face. Chaparral Pro. Chaparral Pro is not a common typeface these days, but in the early 20th century, it was one of the most common typefaces. It's a little heavier. It's got serifs. And for those of you who don't know what serifs are those little dings that, you know, at the end of the T that go up and down. Those are little, in the ascenders and descenders of the type, they're the little signifiers that help people read the words that you write. And when you're writing text, you want people to be able to read it. Sans serif type, like, whatever here, Myrid Pro and Helvetica, don't make good body types because they're hard to read. They don't give you the clues that you need. You've probably all seen that little funny thing on the internet where they show you a line of gibberish and they ask you to read it. And it's based upon the first letter and the last letter, and the vowels can all be messed up. 90% of the people can read that stuff, even though it's literally gibberish, because our brains don't look at every letter. We look at the little signifiers that allow us to guess what the letter is. So if you're putting together I'm gonna ask my wife to make me a cup of coffee. Thanks. If you're putting together a book or a publication, you want your readers to be able to read it easily. So I use a serif font. As we get older, it's hard to read the small type. So I use, whenever possible, at least 10-point type. Now that's kind of a technical term, but if you're using one of these page layout programs, they'll tell you. In this book, I tried to use 12-point type because as we are not young people it's easier to read the 12-point type. And in fact, in the CWC 2020 Lit Review, I used the same face for all the type: headlines, call outs, readouts, table of contents, text, was all this Chaparral Pro. And I chose Chaparral Pro deliberately because the CWC is an old organization. It's been around for over 100 years. And I thought it would be fun in this first iteration of a new book style to go back to something that you might have seen if you were in the CWC in the early days, a typeface that was popular then. Okay, I'm gonna, if I can, I'm gonna show you some stuff, but I need to have somebody give me the ability to share screens. Mike's doing that, I think. He's gonna make me the host. And
Fred, I've already made you the host. You've
been
the
good.
host.
Then I'm gonna share some screens. Let's see if I can find this. Let's see, down there would be desktop, okay. Hell, I'm not very good at this, so I'm gonna start with CBDC, find files, files. Desktop. Oh heck. Well, maybe I'm not, this is not gonna work. Let's see if this shows up. Share screen, thank you, love. Basic, there, okay. This is, can you see that? That is the current version of our chat book.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna add to it, if I can, if this is gonna work. Okay, no, that's not the right one. Let's go with that. Let's go over here to close this. Oh, come on. Oh, we're covering it. I'm sorry to do this to you like this, but I'm trying to do that. Okay. Can you see the, okay, let's hold that. Okay. Now open, stop to share, to share screen. And I'm going to go over here to, let's see if I can do this. Okay. Is that showing up at all? Open. Okay. Oh, screen stopped. This is preview. Okay, there. Can you see that screen now? The 2-page layout.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. One of the ways that I made this look professional is you'll see on the bottom, it says California Writers Club and Literary Review on the right. That is in the same type on every page. With a professional program like InDesign, you're able to do it once throughout the entire book. But even if you're not using that, there should be a way in which you've got page numbers and you've got the same titles all the way across. By doing that, you create a consistency. You'll also see these blue lines there. Now, if I was doing a newspaper that had like 7 columns, you would see 9 lines as each column was defined in terms of its width. This is a small literary book, so we use 1 column. But even though we're just using 1 column, I've divided the page in half in both directions. And I lit every first line lines up across the page so it looks consistent from piece to piece. And the last line on every page is also lined up on the bottom. And I tried to work, in this particular case, this was a layout where we had some extra air, i.e. it was so many pages, but the last page was not a full page of type. And so I go through the entire work and I look for what is called a readout. And a readout is something that catches your eye, that draws you into the story. And I've carefully put my readout on the interior of the 2-page spread, so it draws your eye into the center of the work rather than off the page. And this particular readout says, the parking lot overflowed with cars, but no people and no guards appeared. If you read the story, It's a story that is very mysterious and somewhat frightening. And so I look for a readout that would do that. Paul pressed the unlock button on the fob. Beep, beep. He pulled on the door handle. It wouldn't open. And so I thought that's a kind of scary, brief comment that will fill out my page so that it has a consistent look, and that will also grab the eye of the reader and bring them into the story and make them want to read this as they're flipping through the book. Okay, I'm going to close this. But you can see that, oh, and the other thing, I've got 3 dots. In this particular case, for a random reason, I decided to use stars instead of asterisks. Oftentimes you'll get an asterisk or a dot that breaks up 2 segments. What we see those when we get the copy coming in is we'll see that the author has put in a double return or a triple return. And that indicates that there's a new portion of the story that's starting. And that's a signifier to the reader that this is something new that you can actually, if you wanted to, you could start right there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, we're back to here. So what I've tried to encourage you to do is to create a consistent look that follows from the beginning of your book to the very end of it, where you line up your type, where all your type is the same size, where you don't change the leading on the type. The leading is the space between the lines. When you do things like that, when you change the leading or you change the type from page to page, it creates a look that is amateurish. And it's much, much harder to do. It's much easier to be consistent throughout the entire publication. I'm going to show you some of the other things that, on this, I assume you've all gotten a copy of the literary review. And so I wanted to point out, I'll put this up here. You'll notice that the cover is dark, but the spine is bright yellow. And you'll notice that not only is it bright yellow, but the type is dark. And this is really critical because you see a lot of books in the bookstore where the spine and the type on the spine is so similar that you can't read it. When you do something like this, it stands out across the room. And that gets to the next issue. Okay, with this particular book, even though I tried to get it on newsstands, it was clear to me that the club wasn't ready for that. They didn't want to print extra copies. They didn't want to really work with the distributor. And so the design of this particular book was meant to do one thing and one thing only. It was to capture your eye when it was lying either on the counter of a bookstore or in your home. And that's why I picked something that has nothing to do with the actual interior of the book, but is bright and colorful and has huge contrast. This catches your eye. This was also submitted, and it's a beautiful, beautiful photograph. It's a photograph of a bridge in the middle of the woods, and it's so inviting, but it will not catch your eye lying on the coffee table in your living room. It just won't do it. That thing that was shown about the pandemic that you folks did is a perfect example of a great anthology because it catches your eye. It's not meant to be sold in the average bookstore. It's not meant to compete for real estate on a shelf in a bookstore or in an airport in Des Moines. It's meant to catch your eye on your local bookstore or on your own bookshelf. And so those are the kind of things you look for, is images that really stand out. Now, if this was about a particular person, if this whole book was about, something that was cohesive, then you might want to pick a different image. But we're not looking at that. These are all mailed to 2,100 members of the club. And when they open it, they're going to be surprised because it's a bright, colorful, eye-catching image, not because it tells a story. It's just a flower, but it does catch your image. So that the design on that is really different. If it was sold on a newsstand, you would want something else. You would want something And I'll give you an example. I was hired to publish San Francisco Magazine at one point. And when I showed up there, the particular issue that had been done just before I got there was fantastic. It has such a beautiful cover. It was an old guy who was a painter in his studio, and he was covered in paint. He had a long, droopy mustache. He had a slouch hat on. It was just a beautiful cover. And that particular magazine, which sold mostly at newsstands and a fairly small subscriber base, died. It completely died on the newsstand because guess what? Sad as it is, people don't pick up magazines with old guys on the cover. They pick up magazines with young people on the cover. They pick up magazines with women on the cover. And that's why if you look at a magazine store or a bookstore, you see so many younger, more vivacious people because all of us are attracted to that. When I told my staff that it was a beautiful cover, it was a fantastic story, and we would never do that kind of cover story again, they literally went on strike and walked off the job. And I had to then take over as both editor and art director of San Francisco Magazine for about a week. And then they all came back saying, whoops, maybe we can still do this job. And I rehired them and we went forward. Eventually, Anna McLean, the editor, decided that it just wasn't what she wanted to do. And that's how I became an editor. Prior to that, I'd just been a publisher. And this was kind of how the industry works. We don't like to admit that we're sexist people, that we like youth over age. But the reality is we do. You know, if you want old people on the cover, that's your AARP. I get it every month. You know, that's a niche publication going to a specific demographic. If you're appealing to a great number of people, then you have to kind of abide by what sells. And what sells is youth and vitality. And so if that's what you're trying to put on the cover, if you're doing romance novels, if you're doing mysteries, you'll pick a very different cover than you will if you're not selling on the newsstand, if you're selling directly to a club membership. If you're selling on the newsstand, then you need to go a different direction. This is another publication I put together for a friend of mine. And I did this for free for her. It's her kind of omnibus. Don't try this at home. Betty is 75 years old, and this was my birthday present for Betty. And she's a remarkable, dramatic person. And I would put her on the cover because it's her book. And she's going to sell it to her friends. And they're all going to see her. And she is, interestingly enough, a model. And she has professional photographs. And she has a commitment to moving a publication in this fashion. This book was done, and I might be able to do this. Let's see if I can share this again. Share screen. Don't try this at home. Let's see if I can do that. I just don't know why. Okay, let's see. Share screen. Let's go here. Emeryville, whiteboard, desktop. It's just not doing it. Okay, I'm probably screwing up. Stop share. Okay, let's try share again. I know how to, there it is. I know how to do graphics, but I don't know how to do Zoom. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So that's Betty. She is the antithesis of what I was just telling you, but she is the perfect cover for this particular book because it's a book of her poetry. She's got a lot of flair and drama, and she had a professional photograph shoot this. And she's very happy. I'm going to show you the interior of this as well. I'm going to see if I can stop this. Go away. No. Okay. Okay. Back to here. Now, Betty writes a lot about sex. Betty is, you know, she's a wild lady and she's a lot of fun. And she, if you're, you know, if you're a friend of hers, you know that that's what's coming. And so I took two of her poems. Don't try this at home. Okay, close that. Can you see that now? I put these two poems together, and this is the frontispiece. They're not frontispiece. This is the first poem in the book. And I very carefully picked two poems that I could actually make look like a female figure. And this tells the reader immediately what the kind of stuff that Betty writes is going to be about. And for those people who will buy this book, we only printed 200 copies of this. It basically will keep her in cigarettes and, in her, for the next couple of years. This is exactly what they're looking for. And this is, again, one of the ways that you try to set up your work to really, really sell it. You'll see this kind of pink line. That is the area of the book that is eligible for type. That's the area that on this particular design, that pink box that I set up so that each story fits within that parameter. Now you also see this little box at the very top. I put that in on every page so I know where my top line of title goes. I don't have to worry about it from page to page, so that it is centered. It has a top line that tells me exactly where I'm going to put my type, and then it runs down. So this is yet another way in which you can okay, stopped. Okay, you can sell the inside of your book to readers, to writers. Now, if you're doing poetry, that's one thing. If you're doing prose, it's going to be a whole nother thing. And so let's see if we can't go back to, I'm going to go back to, again, this is the California Writers Club book, and I'm going to share this. I'm getting better at this. This is good. Okay. One of the complaints that I was told came down was that, and you'll notice that in this page, there is color on the page. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of miscommunication because there were multiple people involved in negotiating with the printer. And so this was, while we had originally bid this out as a book that would have a lot of color in it, 26 pages in color, somebody had asked for a bid without color. And this is something that you should note: when you're printing with a professional printer, a commercial printer, color is not very expensive. They're used to printing color. And so the additional cost of doing color on your periodical, on your anthology, is not that much. I think as I recall, we did 2,200 total copies of this book, 2,100 for members and 100 extra. And the additional cost of color was very insignificant. We paid, as I recall, somewhere around $3 a copy for each one of these books. And so that's the deal. Again, in terms of layout, you'll notice that the type is the same across the page, that it starts off in the same areas and it lines up as you go across the page. You can see that the type here, where it says, once everyone was eating, I read aloud about Thomas the Train something. If you jump across the page, it lines up with battalion staff duty officer. He'd received a Red Cross notification. That's how you make a book look professional, by doing that kind of inconsequential, but important things that say, we've actually thought about this. Again, you see the horizontal and the vertical half page, so I can see where I am working. I had a great big spot at the end. I could have put a readout in, but I thought that this photograph related well enough to the story that it would go in, and because it was in color on a gray background, I thought that would pop a lot. You'll notice how Big Spoon Day is in a box. In this book, the California Writers Club, I put every title and author credit in a little box. And the box, you can see, breaks the edge, the boundary of the text, so it catches your eye, but it lines up so that the photograph on the left roughly stops below where the call out, the title on the right starts. These are the kind of little things that you do to give a book a kind of professional look. In a book like this, which is an anthology, it's not uncommon to do what's called a drop cap. A drop cap is an initial first letter that is larger. As I looked at this book, I thought, well, drop caps just really aren't going to work. A lot of the stories started with the word I and or it. And so I thought I would take the first word or two and make those large, and they become like a drop cap. And then I took a little bit line of the line extra, so it actually told a little story. It was on a night like this. That catches the reader's eye. That catches the attention of somebody when they're flipping from story to story, because you cannot expect people to read this particular kind of periodical from front to back. Some will read it from back to front, but mostly people thumb through it until something catches their eye. And that's why you look for titles like A Big Spoon Day. It doesn't really, unless you're a spooner from Oklahoma, you're not going to have any kind of connection with that. But A Big Spoon Day does sound like something that is kind of odd, interesting, might be good. And then you look at the name John Garner. Maybe you know John Garner. So that's why the name is large. And that's one of the things you do with anthologies. I'm going to close this so that you go back to what we're doing here. So again, distribution really, really defines what your design looks like. It not only defines what your design looks like, it defines what your editorial looks like. When I was doing the City magazine in San Francisco, I knew that was going to young hipsters. I knew that for the most part, they weren't going to buy it on newsstands. I knew that for the most part, they were not going to buy it on subscriptions. So I looked for places where we could sell it that would appeal to hipsters. So like hip clothing shops, record stores, things like that. Then you look at, once you look at your demographic, who your readers are, then you look at what your editorial is going to be like. And you do your editorial like that. And then you go to your design. And, you know, when I was doing the City magazine, I had wild typefaces. I'll show you actually a typeface. This is for one of the other things I did this year. And I did this again. This was not going to be sold. This is every year, Emeryville for the last 34 years has done an art show in their community, local artists. And 2-3 years ago, the poet laureate for Emeryville decided to do an ekphrastic poetry reading. Now, ekphrastic means when you write about something that is art, and you can write prose about it, you can write an entire book about it, you can write short stories about it. You know, Ode to a Grecian Urn is a famous poem that was written in the early century where a fellow went to a museum, saw an urn, and wrote this like 10-page poem about this urn in his own life. It's a famous poem. I can't remember who wrote it, but that's what ekphrastic poetry is. And this I'm going to show you is the screen share. God, this is so much easier. Okay, this is one of the works of art in the Emeryville Art Show. And it's a kind of scary piece that Louise Stanley painted. She has a reputation. Her paintings sell for 10 to 20 grand a piece. And I really liked the lighting on this, the fact that she lit these children's faces from below. You know, the myth is that the candle is lighting up their faces. Frankly, a candle would never light up their faces to that degree, but it gives it kind of a scary look. And then I used a typeface and a type style that's called Duquesne, and it's a degraded typeface where the typeface was deliberately damaged and given this kind of ancient, worn out look. And I put it on a white background because it's an art show and a poetry show. And I really wanted to catch the attention of the people who were coming to visit the art show. And they sold this at the counter at the front of the show. And that, let me assure you, caught people's eyes. And the artists loved it. They all got a free copy. The poets love it because the interior of it was full of their poems tied to the art. And so these are the kind of decisions you have to make when you're designing a piece for your particular words. So that, you know, I've shown you a bunch. So let me show you Through Glass Darkly. I I really like this. A woman came to me, an older woman came to me, and she wanted to do a anthology of women, senior women who have had to confront alcoholism in their life. This was kind of a vanity project. She had a reading group of these older women, and she herself had gone through it. And so she said that she wanted to print 500 copies of this. Now, that sounds like an enormous number of copies. You know, selling 500 copies is tough. You've got 35 members in your club, you know, and so if you give every member of the club a copy, that's 35 copies. If you encourage them to buy a copy and you put together something that they want to buy, that gets it up to maybe 100 copies. Put some copies in the local bookstore. Most local bookstores will sell your book, even if it's on consignment. They usually keep 50 to 60%, but that's a good thing. She believed, since her writing group is national, and since AA and alcoholism is a national issue, she believed she could sell 500 copies. And I think she sold probably 200 copies so far. This book came out literally in March, just as all the readings stopped. All the bookstores stopped giving readings. And she is still selling copies through her website. So I'm going to show you this screen, and I put this together. This is a background, the green, and you'll notice again, I've got a dark cover and a dark back cover, and then I've got that bright yellow with dark black type, so that this sits on the bookshelf in the bookstore or in your home, and you can't really miss it. You can't not read it. Through a Glass Darkly, Lens on Life with Alcohol Addiction. I asked her again, we didn't have any art for this, so I asked her to give me a bunch of photographs. And I found this one photograph of her as a child. And she told me that her childhood, because her father was an alcoholic and tended to rages, was a little bleak, we'll just say. And this one photograph was perfect. She also told me that the two other people in the photograph didn't want to be in the photograph because they were her brother and sister who didn't like that she was talking about her family childhood. She was doing that thing that Hemingway talks about, opening up a vein and bleeding all over the typewriter, and they didn't want any part of it. So I cut them out using Photoshop of the background, and I put her over a neutral foliage. It was just some random picture I had in my own files of a bunch of bushes, and I used the front and back with the same foliage, and then I cut her out. This is a picture of her that on the back cover that's probably, I don't know, 10 years old. But it's an attractive picture. She's an attractive woman, and it's her book. She was the editor of this book, and so I put it on the back. I don't know what that beeping is, but so this is a whole different thing. This will sell. It has a biped code, sells for $15. This will sell all across the United States because the people in her anthology live all over the United States. And she has worked out with them that they will talk to their local bookstore and they'll put the books on consignment there. And so this is one other thing you could do. Unfortunately, because there weren't readings, she hasn't done what you guys are about to do with this Christmas story that you're going to read aloud. She hasn't done those readings. And those readings are so important at selling your book, at getting the words out there into the public. There's another book I just finished for Moms for Housing, okay. In Oakland, there was a group of women, mostly African-American women, who were homeless, who had children. And one of the big Wall Street firms has been buying up all of these homes in Oakland that were in foreclosure. And they kept them vacant. And these women decided enough of that. And they moved into the home because they needed homes for their children. And the Alameda County Sheriff's Department came in and with tanks and machine guns, evicted these 4 moms and their children, made national news. It was a really, really big deal. It was in the press everywhere. And a friend of mine said she wanted to do an anthology. that would support these women. And she offered to pay for the publication of it. I volunteered to do all the production for free. And we ended up, Sarah's last book was 32 pages, but using the internet and going out to poets and writers that we knew that have some celebrity in our community and in the high desert, you've got these writers. I know they're there. They're everywhere. And we got some good people that are well known to write for us. And then we got everybody else. We ended up making a 192-page booklet. I got a local distributor who distributes nationally and internationally to take 100 copies. And we did this. Okay, I'm going to show you this. This is Home. Now, the cover on this is actually an image that Sarah found by an artist, and the artist did 6 images. This is half of the image, but this is a bunch of tents underneath an overpass. And I work with my son from time to time, and he's a graffiti artist. And he did the home to look like it was spray painted. He did the anthology of lives in and out of place, which is the subject on this book. And he made it look like it was printed on the side of the overpass. And this is what that looks like. Again, you'll see Colossus Home is in, a typeface and that is bold. It's going to be on the spine, so that what you see on the far left is actually just the spine, and it holds out. Now, what Sarah's done that I love and has been very, very successful is Sarah has done online Zoom readings. She's done dozens of them. There are, I think, 70 or 80 writers who contributed to this book, and she does like 4 writers, and they do a Zoom meeting. Each of the writers propagates the Zoom meeting on Facebook and in their own email lists. If you're a writer, you should be developing an email list. You need to know this, but email lists require permission. So if you've got an old email list, you can't blanket email to them. You need to make sure that all your recipients have asked for your emails. You can be sued for sending out spam like that. You don't want to do that. So you need to make sure that you have a list of readers who have asked to be sent your email submissions. But if you've got 4 readers reading and they've each got 100 people on their list, that's 400 people who get notified about the Zoom reading. Plus, you propagate it on Facebook. You propagate it, any of the club news letters that you have got, and you let at least 500-600 people know. And if you let 500 or 600 people know, 35 people will show up. It's sad. Of those 35 people, there are 4 readers are the readers, and there's 2 people that are helping to manage it, much like this group here. But you can actually sell your books and get the word out and support the sales in bookstores all across the nation. And so this is again part of what being a writer these days entails. If Penguin's not going to pick you up, that doesn't mean you're not a writer. That doesn't mean you can't publish. Every person on this meeting can publish a book of their own. People can get together. We have a group up here in the Bay Area called 16 Rivers Press. 16 Rivers Press is a cooperative. I think at one time there were 16 members, which is why they call it that. They work together, they co-edit each other's piece, and then they publish it under 16 Rivers Press. And that is a perfectly reasonable way to do it. I do the Watershed Poetry Festival every year, and I go to or help put together the Northern California Book Reviewers Awards every year. They show up at these events. And if one of their writers has been nominated for a prize, then they show up with all of their books to sell their books. At the Watershed Poetry Festival, they show up with a table and they sell their books at the table. And so that there's so many opportunities. You're not likely to get to be a millionaire. You're not going to be a J.K. Rowling, but you all get your books out there in the world, and you will get that kind of credibility that being a published writer gives you and makes you feel good about. Makes you feel like what you're doing is not just whistling in the dark or winking at a girl in the dark. It is something that actually is powerful, and it's practical, and it's physical. It's something you can hold in your hand. This chapbook, we did 200 copies for her. A bunch of her friends and I kicked in. It cost $400 to do a chapbook. She sells these for $15 a piece, and she sold them to her friends. She's got, actually, these are on sale. This particular book, because Betty used to live in London, is in 2 different bookshops in London and 1 in Australia. And she's formerly of Austin, Texas, so she's got it in bookshops in Austin. She's now living in Ashland, Oregon, and she's got it there as well. So this is what we have to do as independent writers. And if we do this, then the big guys start to notice us. Then you can actually show them that you're a published writer. And as an editor, I always look for, in all the publications I ever did, I look for writers who actually had something published. I found out as an editor when I was assigning texts that a lot of people at the highest levels were completely unreliable. And I'll give you an example. I was doing an international magazine called Le Jus, and Corby Kummer is the senior editor at Atlantic Monthly. And he pitched me on a story. And you would think that a guy like that really is spot on. He's a pro. He's going to turn it in as he said, when he said, it's going to be perfect. Well, Corby Kummer, he's a big guy. So he wanted to do a big piece. He wanted to do an 8,000 word piece, which if you look at like Atlantic Monthly, they do these big pieces. So I said, okay. And he said he would turn it in 3 months. Well, I checked in with him and it wasn't moving very quick. And then come the 3-month period, he sent me 4,000 words that quite frankly were crap. And I looked at it and I figured out where the narrative arc of the story was. And I called him back up and I spent a fortune on long distance phone calls because we went through every change and everything. And I told him what I needed. I was going to take this section of the book and make it in the front. I was going to take this section of the story and put it at the end. And I needed him to fill it out. And I gave it back to him and he did. And we came back when it finally went to press. It was about 3,000 words, maybe a little less. And he was proud of it. He was really, really, it was a good, solid piece about tea in wartime. And I got a phone call one day about a month later, and it was an editor at the New York Times in the food section. And she said, Fred, I just want you to know this. This is something that no one will ever tell you. And so I think it's important for you to hear. She said, you're a really damn good editor because I work with those people that you're working with, and I know what their copy is like when they turn it in. Now, these people that I was working with are nationally noted writers. They're the big guys who are making bank. And so we're not really that much, we're really competitive with those people. As writers, you have the ability to compete at that level. You have the skill set. And working a piece is important. You need your community, you need your writers group, you need those people that you trust to give you honest feedback that is not critical, will not make you feel bad. They need to tell you what works. They need to tell you what stands out. They need to tell you how good you are, because you are good. And the more you write, the better you get. I've taught creative writing in the prisons. I've taught them in the schools. I've taught them at the universities. And I have to tell you this, writing is not an art. It's not a craft. It's a practice. The more you write, the better you get. The more you read out loud, the better you get. I think I've kind of shot my wad on this. And so I'm open to questions now.
Okay, Fred. those, the way you're lining up your pages, making, for instance, the top line, first on the page, how do you, I just had a lot of trouble getting that done with my last book. I'm doing it just KDP. And boy, I'd go through it every single time and, and make sure they were the same, but I'm sure they really weren't. And how do you get those, how do you get those boundary markings in there?
Well, I use, and these are actually available to you. Go on eBay or go on your local Craigslist or go on your local Facebook group and ask to buy a copy of an older copy of InDesign. InDesign is a professional program. You can literally set the tab, so you can set it. It says, make the lines line up, snap to grid, it's called. And that's what I do, because I've got what is now a 5-year-old version of Adobe InDesign. I've seen them for sale on eBay for about $300-400. They come for both MS-DOS style or CPM, or what do they call it, Windows style, and for Mac, the Apple OS. I've got a 3-year-old computer. I never, ever, ever allow them to upgrade my system. I don't allow them to upgrade my programs. When they ask you to do it, I know. And every day I have to say no, because the minute they upgrade my program, they will make it dysfunctional. That's how they sell their new programs. Adobe won't sell you their old programs anymore. Now they want you to buy a subscription service, a monthly service. And since 99% of the work I do is free, I make like $1,000 a year off some random person who decides they want me to do something. It's just not worth it spending $1,000 a year on Adobe to have the latest, greatest thing. And I know how to use InDesign 6. It's called Creative Suite 6. It's Adobe Creative Suite 6. It's available for all your machines. If you've got a Mac, you can only use the Mac version. If you've got anything else, you can use the Windows version. The other thing you have to do is look on your program. Somewhere on your program, it'll allow you to set your grid lines.
Oh, okay.
And to be honest with you, I learned this years ago. Every book, every newspaper, every magazine has an underlying grid. Even if you break the grid, you have to do it deliberately. You have to do it thoughtfully. And if you keep to the grid, it will look sharp. If you keep your text with good leading, like I use on a 10 point, I'll use 12.5 leading. On 12 point, I'll use 14 point leading, and that's the space between the lines. I try to give an open air. This particular book that you've got, the literary review, we had some economic issues. And so I thought that I actually had to cut several stories that were originally intended because they only wanted to fund 108 pages. And then it turns out that there was some miscommunication. And just so you know, if you're not using the local copy shop, if you're using a commercial printer, they print in what are known as 8-page signatures. So this is 4 pages because you fold it in half and it makes it 5.5 by 8.5. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is the minimum that you're going to do is 4-page increments. You can't have 105 pages. You can only have 104. Now, if you're using a commercial printer, not a coffee shop, then it's actually going to be in 8-page increments. So that means 8, 32, 64, large numbers. And that's where we got 112 versus 108 pages. Because we'd been told at one point they were printing on 4-page signatures, and it turned out they weren't. They were printing on 8-page signatures. So you have to take that into consideration.
Very informative. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. I can show you a little trick. If you're going to do this at the copy shop, take your piece of paper, fold it in half, fold it in half again. Okay, that just gave you 32 pages. Take your sharpest knife, exactly if you got one, and you cut a little triangle inside this, and you start numbering them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 32. Now, if you got a 62-page book, you do 2 of those and you slip the 2 of them together. And then when you unfold it, you'll be able to see on both sides where each page will go if you're trying to do your own books and folding them and binding them. Just so you know, and this is again, this is 64 pages. This don't try this at home. That is the maximum you can do and still do it staple bound. If you go more than 64 pages, you're going to start to get tear out. If you're going more than 64 pages, you really need to go up to 112 pages to get perfect bound. This is thin. This is not even half an inch. And perfect bound means that they take all those signatures, they put them together, they glue them into the book, and then they trim the book. If you get less than 112 pages, it falls apart and you start losing your signatures. This book at 192 pages is much more substantial. The bind on that, the spine on that is solid. These are not going to come out. And this really stands out in the bookshelf. But that's a bigger deal. We did 500 copies and I think it was $2,800 to print 500 copies of this. But in this particular book, there's color everywhere on the inside. There's lots and lots of color. Let me just find a color page. I was, every section of the book is a 2-page color. And that's, she broke it up into 5 sections.
I have a question for you, Fred.
Yes, sir.
It may not be up your alley, but it's related to online publishing. I have several articles, essays published by smerconish.com,
Good.
the Huffington. And I recently had one turned down, just put me in tears, of course.
Okay.
He said it was too philosophical, not enough critical thinking. I really don't know what that thin line is between philosophical and critical. But then I went online.
It's bullshit.
What's that?
It's bullshit.
Oh, thank you. There, I have it. I have it under authority. So I've been running around the house with my wife. So tell me the difference between philosophical and critical thinking.
No.
But at any rate, I go back online. There's a new editor there, and my question is about any tips for getting in length of essays. These guys have monetized all the vanity writing.
Yes.
It doesn't look like the editor is really editing anything.
No.
Compilation. It's a cafeteria of everything that's submitted to them, which gets clicks, right? All they care about is clicks.
Yep.
So do you have any, I'd be happy to pay you or send to the Writers Club. My last essay was called Oh My Aching Oath. And
My Aching what?
Oath.
Okay.
But this is the new world of vanity writing. You turn your stuff in. And do you have any tips for these online people, what they're looking for, or are they real editors? Are they even real editors? Are they just putting stuff together that makes people go to their site?
Okay, you asked 2 questions and I'm going to answer both of them. The world has changed. And no, they are not real editors. They will not work with you on your piece. They will not help you. That's what your writing community is for. And yes, everything is being monetized. And that's why you see so many stories that are lurid and dishonest. Those are the 2 things. The QAnon conspiracy, where, they've got people eating babies in pizzerias in Brooklyn. That stuff is insane, but there are people that want to read that stuff. So they jump on it. And then Medium, which is the monetized version, is also looking for something. They want that story that you're going to tell them about seniors in assisted living having orgies. You know, they want the lurid spectacle. And I'm sorry, that's just kind of where that segment of the community is. But there are a lot more segments. You know, there's a lot more out there, and your club is a perfect example of that. You know, if you're just trying to get published, you can use the network you have, the 35 members and the 2,300 members of the California Writers Club. The California Writers Club didn't have any problem with, you know, opinion pieces and what were the terms you were using?
Oh, the editor wrote back and said, it's too philosophical. We only look for critical thinking articles.
Such a dishonest response. I would suggest to you submit it more. I don't know if you heard this at the beginning. I said there's the old 80-20 law. You know, 80% of your publications are going to reject your work. 20% of them are going to take a look at it. When I was selling ads, I told all my salespeople, you have to make 3 phone calls to get somebody to answer the phone. You have to get 3 people who answer the phone to get somebody who will pass it through to the person who actually makes the decision. You have to get 3 people who actually make the decision to get 1 appointment. So that means you're going to make 27 phone calls to make 1 appointment. Don't waste a lot of time on your phone calls. Don't waste a lot of time on your pitches. You know, pitch. Because somewhere out there is somebody who's going to read your piece and they're going to say, damn, Michael Brewer has a voice. Michael Brewer has something to say, and I want to promote that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Don't be defeated by those idiots. Another question. I love answering questions.
I got a question, Fred.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I've always wanted to ask this. Why do you use a Macintosh? What's the advantage? Why is that better than a
My wife uses non-Macintosh equipment. Okay. My wife worked for the county of Alameda. She ran a program with 23,000 clients, 80 employees, 6 clinics. And that was the computer that she was given by the county. And they gave her the software, which is the same software I use. And she uses that. I don't know how to use an IBM style or what's called a Windows style. You know, there's a funny little story about Windows, by the way. Apple and Bill Gates sued each other at one point. And I have friends who worked at Xerox PARC, which was the Xerox company, had a research facility, PARC, which is Palo Alto Research Center. And Palo Alto Research Center designed all that really, really simple to use, intuitive software and never patented it. And Bill Gates and Steve Jobs hired Xerox PARC employees and used it to create what we call the Mac interface and the Windows interface. And they sued each other. And in court, Bill Gates said to Steve Jobs that he thought it was hilarious that Apple was suing him for using the same software that they stole from Xerox PARC. So my advice to you is, I'm familiar with the Mac. I got my first Mac was a Mac Plus. I was publishing Bay Area Business Magazine at the time. I had an advertiser who was willing to trade me a bunch of Macs for a bunch of ads. And we converted our whole staff to Macs. When I was hired at the Examiner was sold to the Fang family, and they were looking at which way to go. And unfortunately, they went to a proprietary software system that had their own computer bases. And that's why the first couple issues of the Examiner were a nightmare. They had been negotiating to buy all Apple software. It would have been better for me, but not better for other people. It's really what you're used to, Bob. I use a Mac because that's what I'm used to. And I've been using it for 20 plus years. I was doing magazines when when Adobe first came out with PageMaker, and they said it was good for putting up neighborhood flyers. I took one look at that, sold by Verityper, sold by Stat Camera. I got rid of all that stuff and gave everybody Macintoshes, and it worked for me. And that's why I still do it. I hate Apple. Apple's too expensive. They're proprietary. They do nasty things like try to upgrade you so your equipment doesn't work. I use Time Machine on my Apple so that if I accidentally upgrade and they screw me all up, I can go back to what I was using a month ago and start all over again. I back up my files religiously. That's just what I do.
Thank you.
And all these programs that I've mentioned are available for IBMs as well, or for non-Macintoshes as well. Another question.
Are you familiar with a software called Scrivener?
I was given a free copy of Scrivener twice, and I've never used it. So I can't tell you about it. I know a lot of people love it. I'm not that kind of writer. When I write, I just write. In fact, I'll tell you a little story. This is a true story. I knew Ken Kesey, and I knew a bunch of the people from the Stanford writing program, the William Stegner program. And I kind of knew some of them fairly well, and I knew a lot of them distantly. And one of the friends that I knew fairly well was Vic Lovell, who Ken Kesey dedicates One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest to. Okay. And he told me about how Ken Kesey did his One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest. He wrote and wrote and wrote, and then he would take these chapters and he would pin them to the wall, and he would move them around his little cottage on Perry Lane until he figured out kind of what the story was going to do. As an editor, I've always told my writers, just write. I can help you cut a story out of what you wrote, but I can't write what you didn't write. You know,
Fred,
so
did you know Steve Hutchison, the cartoonist at San Francisco Chronicle?
I don't know him, but I know his name. I knew Dick, what's his name? McSweeney, Dave. Oh shit. Eggers, Dave Edgars. In fact, I first met Dave Edgars when he was coaching my son's soccer team, and he was looking for an assistant coach, and I didn't know who he was. He was a cartoonist and an editorial illustrator for the Chronicle at the time. And then when he bought Cups magazine from Dave Latimer, and he would call me up from time to time to get advice on dealing with printers, and you know, so I knew him back when before he became the international, you know, wonder that he is today. So no, I don't know all the cartoonists. There literally are hundreds of them. I actually worked with Gray Smith, who was an editorial cartoonist and illustrator for the Chronicle, and did the book on the Zodiac. And he wrote a story for me in one of my magazines that scared the shit out of me, because he wrote from the mind of the serial killer. And he said he knew who the serial killer was and offered to take me over to Cole Hardware, where the guy worked behind the counter. And when he did the illustration for the story that he wrote, he used this guy's face, who was later, you know, charged with the killings. And the face was this guy in the woods staring over your body. And it was just the creepiest thing I ever read. Or
Did you
saw.
ever do any stories about Esalen?
About who?
Esalen? Where all the...
I lived in Esalen for a while.
What's that?
I lived there for a while.
Oh, wow.
It was a very, very interesting place in the early 70s, which is when I lived there. I understand it's very, very different now, but I knew Jia Fu Feng. I knew Richard, I can't remember his name, Richard, I knew Dick.
Ramdas?
Oh, I met Dick Alpert Ramdas, but there was another guy who was at Esalen, who and Stanley. I knew Stanley, who was the head doc at Atascadero, and he told me a funny story about I can't remember Dick's last name, but Dick had a psychotic episode at Esalen, and Stan called up the hospital and said, "I'm going to send this guy in, and he needs to be set aside for a while because he's having a real hard time. And he sent somebody else. And when they got there, Dick explained that he was the guy that was escorting this other guy named Dick that needed to be locked up. And it took them several hours because at Esalen, nobody carried wallets. Nobody, they just drove off in their, yoga pants.
They didn't carry any clothes either.
Yeah, I know that. It was a place, actually, when I was there, it was a place where people went to find themselves, which was a fancy word of saying screw other people so they could break off their marriages. And it was a interesting time. My favorite part of Esalen was late at night. I would go late at night. I would empty out the bathtubs, and after midnight, because they got really quiet, they had a girl side and a boy side. And I always go to the girl side. They weren't really gender specified. It's just the girl side was quiet and the boy side wasn't. And I would empty a tub and I'd refill it, and I would sit there and I'd look at the moon over the Pacific Ocean and listen to water, and I'd stay in the tub from about 1 o'clock till about 3 o'clock. And then I'd go back and go to my cottage and go to sleep.
My daughter went to CIIS in San Francisco, California Institute of Integral Studies. They called it a Jedi school. And that's where I used to go to, where California Writers Club was founded.
Oh, wow.
At Jack London Square, because I visit her a lot up there.
Yeah.
But I used to tell her, I think every leftover hippie from the 70s taught at CIIS, Michael Murphy.
Yeah, Michael Murphy was one of the guys I knew it. That was his family's, Esalen was his family's motel. And it had fallen into disrepair. Nobody wanted it. And he and a bunch of hippies took it over and turned it into Esalen. And it's interesting. My ex-wife, or not ex-wife, because we never got married, but my ex went to CISSI or whatever it's called. And she got her psychology degree there.
Fred, I have a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that traditional printers, there was very little difference between printing black and white and printing color.
Yeah.
And just as a comment, I run into this a lot mostly I deal with KDP, and their difference between black and white and color is astronomical.
Yes, it is.
Just as for instance, I have a spreadsheet I built, a 96-page book, which is very thin for a book. Black and white with KDP would cost you $2.15. That same book, if you did color, is $7.57. And one of the things that KDP, it's either all color or it's not. So if you have one color picture in a 200-page book, they charge you for color for the entire book.
That's right.
Maybe that's one of the disadvantages of using KDP as opposed to going with someone else is, it's astronomical to do a color book with them.
Whatever the market will bear.
And it's insane because to my knowledge, blue ink doesn't cost any more than black ink. I mean, they're all inks, but they charge you. It's 7 cents a page. Yeah, it's 7 cents a page with KDP for color, and it's 1/4 cent a page for black and white.
In the front of this book, and I always do this because I like it, is the printer that printed this. And it's on page 1, 2, printed by BR Printing at San Jose, California. Give them a call. The other thing, there's a local printer in your area who prints all the political crap that you get in the mail every year. When it's not October and they're buried, September and October are really bad times for printers because they're printing all the fourth quarter stuff and the political stuff. They're desperate for jobs. Autumn Press is up here, and Autumn Press used to print this, which is the Milvia Street, the Berkeley City College, formerly Peralta College literary magazine. And when I was talking to Michael the other day, or Miguel, I was telling him that that's what I was doing these days. He said, please let me bid on it. He said, I can match those prices. Because in the old days, when I first started, and Mike, I'll get to you. When I first started to do 4 color, you had to get color separations. Then you had to do ruby lift. You had to do all this, a lot of handwork, really complicated. And getting it in registration was really complicated. I watched a printer once fill a 20 cubic yard dumpster with dross because they couldn't get the registration right. Okay, that's not the case anymore. You know, this is all computerized. And so for them to print color on as well, again, it kind of breaks my heart because Donna, unbeknownst to me, negotiated with the printer and didn't tell me this was full of 4-color. This had color all over the place. And because she didn't tell me, and she had asked for a slightly cheaper bid and failed to follow through on it, when it got printed, it was all printed in black and white. There's no reason not to print in color. The additional cost is really modest these days because everything's computerized.
But don't most of your local printers like you're talking about there, they don't do on demand. Don't you have to buy, you have to contract for 500 books or 200 books, or so you have that offside dealing with people who have no money, which very few of us do. At least with KDP, you can order 1 copy or 10 copies.
Yep.
So you kind of have to look at the difference where you want to go from an investment standpoint.
And my personal feeling is that with your network, you can, I mean, the first book I did for Betty, we did 50 copies. And that was when she was in Austin. And I just paid for it out of my pocket because it was like $100 and it was like, you know, I could afford that. And I sent it off to her and she sold them out fairly quickly because she had a big community in Austin. And she read out a lot. She flogged her books and made people buy them. I mean, people will not buy your book because it's sitting there quietly. You got to walk up and say, hey, you got $15 on you? I'll sign this to you. You know, you really have to sell your stuff. And so then I sent her the PDF and she had a second print run. So she ended up selling several hundred copies of this in Austin. When we did this, I used B&R and it cost $400. We did, and that includes everything. I think it was $418 total with tax and shipping and everything. We did 200 copies, which is $2 a copy. And I think we actually did 220 copies. And, you know, she'll sell these for $15 a copy. Will she sell them right away? No. There's another book. One of the first books I ever did was for Trees Press. And Dolan Ergel was doing books on California Indians. And I didn't know it at the time, but he actually had been requested by the Smithsonian to do this book. And he came to me with 5 discs, the old floppy disk. Remember the old floppy disks? And boxes and boxes of photos. And we put together a book. I reorganized the book. I told him what he had to fill it in. I found the, you know, we went through all the photos that he had. We laid them all out and we printed 5,000 copies, which was a lot of copies. And this was back in the 90s when we were doing copies with Ruby Lift, and you know, it was a lot of handwork. We had to get separations. It was a very, very big deal. He sold all 5,000 copies out. It took him a number of years to sell all 5,000 copies. But at $24 a copy, he sold all 5,000 copies. You know, and then we did the second book, which is called A Native Guide to California, First Peoples, blah, 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 something like that. And that was in 2000. And again, the Smithsonian, I got a picture of myself at the Smithsonian holding a copy of the book that they were selling in the bookstore. I'm like, dude, that rocks. You know, that is like, that's as good as it gets. I mean, it'd be nice to be on the New York Times bestseller list, but I thought the Smithsonian was pretty good. And again, it was like $20,000. Today, that same book, it was an 8.5 by 11, all 4-color, you know, bookstock cover with UV coating. You know, it's really a coffee table book. You know, today that would probably run for 5,000 copies. I could probably get that for $10,000. You know, I haven't bid on it, but I'm just guessing in the way that printing has come down. It's like everything else. It's computerized now. It's much less labor intensive, much less material intensive. And so, yeah, invest. It's your life. Yes, Mike.
Okay, I just wanted to say we've been on for a while. I've noticed we've had some people that had to leave. I just wanted to let everybody know, if you do have to leave, feel free. Let's express our appreciation to Fred, though, in case anybody does have to leave. But I'm here for the duration. I'm going to leave the Zoom open. Whoever wants to stay and chat and talk to Fred, please feel free to do so. It's up to him how long he wants to stay and share with us. The stories are fantastic.
I love
And
this.
really
This is
enjoyed
fun.
it.
This is what I do for socialism, for social outlet now. You know,
Not for socialism.
no, for social behavior. I mean, we used to throw parties, and we haven't had a party in 7 months. You know, Thanksgiving comes up, and we normally have like 30 to 50 people over for Thanksgiving. And this year it's my wife and I. We're not even sure we're going to let our kids come.
We're
Fred,
all
I just went to a virtual wedding in Dallas, Fort Worth. My grandkids, both grandkids had a double wedding, and they had planned to have like 700 people there, and of course they couldn't because of the pandemic and everything. But they had in the reception, they set up like little columns all over the room, and they had computers set up that were hooked to the Zoom presentation, and guests were free to wander by and just stop and talk to those of us who weren't there physically, that we were Zooming. And so I think I sat for 4 or 5 hours, because people would just wander by and say, hey, let me talk to you for a while.
Yeah.
And then the video person, every once in a while, she'd cut in and she'd say, okay, go over here to the Facebook. We got a new video posted if you want to watch it. But it was hysterical because, this is a directed thing where, we know who's here. But at the wedding, people just wandered by one of the computer stations and started talking to you. It was enjoyable. It was hysterical. It was so much fun.
I think this actually is going to change our world. I have a son-in-law who is an Apple employee, and he's an interesting guy. He was an alcoholic, totally messed up, and my daughter, spent a great deal of time and energy working with them, and he went back and got he's a really smart guy, and father of two of our grandkids, and he's now at Apple rebuilding Siri at the highest levels. At the highest levels. He hasn't been to work in 6 months. He works nonstop. He works 24/7. His issues with alcohol are the same issues that he's got with work. He can't turn it off. And my daughter says it's perfect. It's wonderful, because it is who he is. And they've been together for over 20 years. And now he knows what he's doing, and it's not self-destructive. And he's making enormous sums of money. He's making more than my wife and I combined ever made. And he's happy. And the kids we set up our basement so they have a classroom here. And last night, that creature back there in that chair was part of an orchestra. She's at the Crowden Music School, and they had a 3-hour classical music evening. And she plays the double bass, the upright bass. And we watched it. It was fantastic. Normally, we would have to be in one of these giant churches and stuck in rows. We were able to get up and open a beer, fill the plate, use the restroom, wander around, stretch our legs. I like the Zoom. I really
Fred,
do.
AA and Al-Anon are meeting 24 hours, 24/7 online, worldwide.
Thank
Now
God.
people are talking to everyone. Of course, the joke would be most of them are from Ireland. That's not true.
Well, as you
Yeah,
well
but
know,
they're-
if you've
they're
ever been to
meeting
an
people
Al-Anon
from
meeting,
every
that's not
country.
true.
They're
Most
meeting
of them
people
are
from
from
every
here.
country in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when our son was going through this, I call him my son, but I went to Al-Anon meetings. I went to AA meetings. I wanted to know how to help him.
Fred, just to jump in here, After we published the lit review, we found out, Jenny, that it is print on demand. So unlike our previous printer, we could go back to them saying we wanted 50 more lit reviews, we could get them at that publication price.
Ask for the color version.
Yes, this time we would ask for the color version, but we didn't want to mix that up because we don't want somebody out there, hey, my friend has a color version, but I don't, you know.
Yeah,
So
I know. That's an issue.
Well,
Well,
your next one will be lots and lots of colors, Fred. I'm looking forward to it.
Let me tell you, I've already made that conditional. If you want me to do this, I'm the only person that can negotiate with the printer. Because I mean, had I known, I would have designed it for black and white. But you know, I sold all these wonderful people, all these CWC members, on the fact that their images were going to be in color. And I haven't had anybody beat me about it yet. But boy, you know, when you look at, there's some of these issues, they're 2-page spreads of color, and they're just black and white, and it's like, oh, it hurt my heart when I saw it. Anyway, more
Fred, we got
questions?
to have you come back another time, I think,
Sure, happily.
because you're a lot of fun.
I like to talk.
We have a California Writers Club convention at Esalen in the hot tubs.
A lot of wrinkles, baby. A lot of wrinkles.
I was
Ask.
there. I went there right after the Vietnam War to heal.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
I healed that night. I don't know
Yeah.
about after that.
Because I've been in publishing for a long time, we would often trade advertising with people for their stuff. And I happen to like Wilbur Hot Springs. And my parents came out once, and I thought, well, I'll go to a Hot Springs. And I had totally forgotten it was clothing optional. And we get there, and I got my kids, my wife, my sister, my sister-in-law, my parents. And as we're driving into Wilbur Hot Springs, which is down a long road in Winters, California, Northern California, a long road off the highway, we finally make a corner, and we see this beautiful 1800s hotel and a group of people walking across the, you know, jaybird naked. And I went, oh shit. I totally forgot. And it was kind of funny because my dad didn't have any problem at all. He put his caftan on and went out to the smoking bridge, because that's what he did. He smoked and regaled people with stories. And my mother sat in a hot tub, and she was hardly the oldest person in there, and she was hardly the heaviest person in there, and she was in a bathing suit for the first 20 minutes. And then she said, forget it. And she took off the bathing suit because she felt like a freak. You know, my first experience in California, literally my first experience in California, was I show up at a house and I knock on the door. It's in one of my memoirs. I knock on the door, and this woman, and I'm 19, I'm a virgin, I'm naive, I know nothing. And this woman opens the door, and she is a natural redhead. And that should tell you everything you need to know, because she was a natural redhead. And I locked into her eyes. I was like, oh my God, I can't let go of your eyes. And she smiled this smile, this big giant smile, because she knew exactly what was going on. And that was California for me. A couple months later, I moved into a house with a swimming pool, and I very quickly learned that naked doesn't mean interested in me. It just means naked. It's not a big deal. And I saw so many naked people that I would come out in the morning, because I lived in the Cabana, which was, where we hippies lived back then, anywhere we could. And I would yell at all these naked women, shut up, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying to sleep.
Have you
Oh,
seen
yeah.
Echo in the Canyon, the movie, Echo in the Canyon?
Echo in the Canyon, yeah.
All the musicians along.
Well, I'll tell you
Laurel
another
Canyon.
story. Yeah,
On Zoom social.
that was Laurel Canyon.
Laurel Canyon, yeah.
The movie's called Echo in the Canyon, but the canyon is called Laurel Canyon. And Joni Mitchell has an album called Ladies of the Canyon. And the first person that song, Ladies of the Canyon, is about is Karina Robbins, who's a friend of mine. And Karina Robbins is this amazing, wonderful person, just incredible person. She's a cartoonist and an author. And if you Google her, she's got about 15 books out. The history of women cartoonists is one of them, women illustrators, and The Last Girl Standing is one. And she talks about her life back then when she dated Jim Morrison, and Donovan was one of her dear friends, and her husband, or not her husband, her boyfriend, Trina's boyfriend, was the drug dealer that all the rock stars were buying their dope from. And she is Trina, which is the first half of that song, Trina in the Canyon. And she's kind of an amazing, interesting person who's had a spectacular life and ended up in the canyon. But prior to that, she was in the Village in New York. And that's where she met Wavy Gravy, Hugh Romney, whose Volkswagen van broke down in front of her shop, and she used to sew his clothes up. So really,
So Mike, this is called the California Writers Club non sequitur session.
all writing is a non sequitur. Yeah, it's the canyon.
Figure Hollywood Nights.
Yeah, I never lived there. I was a Northern California guy. I moved from Arizona. I hitchhiked out here, and I told you my first experience in California, and it was like that sold me. I was like, I'm done. I'm not going
I'm
back
from
to Arizona.
Tucson.
What's
I
that?
moved there from Tucson, Arizona.
Nice. Tucson's much nicer than Phoenix.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of the hipster area. That's where Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney had their home.
They still own
Tucson.
it.
Yeah.
Still there.
Yeah. We my parents had a place in Mexico, and my wife has never liked it, and so we never go there anymore. But you'd have to go through. We'd go to Arizona to visit my parents, and then go to Mexico, where they had a place.
Through Rocky Point, Puerto Venasco.
Yeah, Puerto.
Oh yeah.
It's Puerto Penasco. If you go back, actually, we still allegedly own this place right on the Sierra Cortez. Literally, the Sierra Cortez is 20 feet away, but nobody's been there in 15 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Want to sell it?
yeah, happily.
Hey, folks, Fred, I'm going to sign off now. But,
Right, what a pleasure. Who do I have to hustle to get a copy of this anthology you guys did?
Do we have your mailing address?
Bob, Isabel sure does.
Okay, well, we'll just put one in the mail to you.